Welcome everyone to another episode of the Shaman's Way podcast. As always, this episode comes from the teachings of our amazing friend and shaman in residence, Kriket. We hope you're enjoying these podcasts as much as we enjoy making them, and I'd like to take just a moment to ask you if you would please leave us a rating and a comment in iTunes or whichever podcast player you're listening to us from. Giving us a rating and sharing this podcast with others is the biggest way you can tell us that you like our show. Now, without further ado, on with the episode.
Hello, my constant listener. Hello to the new ears, to my practiced ears, to my lovely ears which join me each time I send some messages or ideas. Thank you for continually supporting Shaman's Way and continually supporting myself and Doug and the team who put the work together. I want to talk about ethics today, and I think that it is something that we do not often talk about. We have a long list of professions who have a relationship to ethics, who talk about ethics, who discuss ethics. Ethics is the responsibility of all of our practitioners in what is most likely the vast majority of the shamanic classes and workshops I've attended. Many of them did not spend much more than a few minutes of time or maybe a couple of comments scattered here and there with respect to ethics, if at all. And I know myself, I don't often teach ethics either. I don't discuss a lot about ethics either. I'm not particularly certain why, but it was really in recognizing that I do have an oversight that I wanted to address it in perhaps a more public forum than in a small class or in a smaller setting. Caregiver sensitivity in ethical matters has been carefully studied, discussed, and disseminated throughout many other contemporary healing professions. We think about the ethics of the medical profession, we think about the ethics of the psychologists, any of these other and many other types of things. Shamanic practice, as we've talked about, involves the direction of power among really vulnerable human beings. This combination of power and vulnerability brings it to the very front of my attention. And are we acting responsibly? I know when someone walks through my door or reaches out to me for some healing work, I know that they have likely tried everything else. I think that from my perspective, living in the Canadian world that I do, I think that 99.2% of the population of Alberta would never set their foot through my door. So I always believe that the individuals who don't know me and most people who walk through the door for work don't know me. I think it takes a ton of courage, and I am humbled by the courage of the people who reach out to me or who do have the opportunity to walk through my door and to work together. So I do recognize their vulnerability. And just to get the matter straight, I'm not going to fabricate any kind of romantic myth about shamanic ethics. I'm a human being, you're a human being. I grew up in certain social and environmental contexts, and as such, I am limited as well as unlimited in my potential as any other person. By now, many of us have heard stories of people who are drawn to shamanism, who've trekked into the mountains or into the jungles to have an experience, sometimes even just suburban homes across town. And they come out of their experiences feeling abused or disempowered, and at times even harmed. Just as with business people, academics, shopkeepers, politicians, etc. Intelligence or knowledge does not automatically equate with ethical practice. And I think that it is important to recognize the vulnerability of practices that are on the outskirts of the norm. And I think that shamanism is on the outskirts of the norm, although it has been in the last, in North America at least, since the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, bringing, neo-shamanism or the modern shamanism to many people. We've certainly seen a lot of individuals who are working with their power intact or not intact. I think I kind of went off track there. I apologize if I didn't make my point. I went off on some tangent, and I apologize for that. We've all heard stories of shamanic seekers meeting extraordinary, wise, patient, helpful, and compassionate people who also happen to be shamans. People are people, and in the case of shamans, their area of expertise does not indicate immunity to shortcomings. We're all vulnerable. Shamans, all of us in this reality are no exception. And I really believe from an ethical perspective, for myself personally, if I'm not able to stand in the place of healer, if I am not strong enough to stand in the place of healer, I've just experienced death in my immediate family, which has caused me to take a step back and to postpone healing sessions with people because I am emotionally not capable of standing in the place of a healer. I think that it is very ethical. It would be unethical of me to stand in the place of healer when I have nothing to draw from. Not only is it unethical for me to do that for my own self, it's highly unethical for me to do that to a person who is trusting me, a person who is walking through my door, who is brave, who is vulnerable, who really seeks someone to be there for them and hold the vessel. If my vessel is leaking, I do no service to anyone else. And I think it's important to recognize that. If I was a medical doctor or if I was a dentist, perhaps I would have a different idea. But because my work deals with a person's soul, with a person's psyche, it is very important to me that I come to this practice as clean in my thoughts and as clean in myself as possible. Whatever clean means to you, whatever that means to you is going to be different than what it means to me. Just because I have XYZ as a pre-practice doesn't mean you have to. For me, in order to move into the place of healer, I take a half hour prior to every session that I do in prayer, and I then allow myself to breathe deeply in spirit, release the ego, and come to a place where I am standing in the place of healer and not standing in the place of human being who just got off work, who just got home, who just blah, 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 all of that. Right? So I want us to be aware that we have to be ethical and aware of our own internal working if we're going to do internal working with other individuals. We have all heard the premise that healer, heal thyself. We've also heard the premise that we are in this position because we've been given the gifts and tools. That may be true, but we have to work with those gifts and tools. There's no exception to that. Practice, practice, practice. It's very important. And it's very important that you practice when you're in the state of mind that you can practice. Spirits provide information or healing, but I always have the ultimate decision and the veto power as to whether any work will be done, and if so, how. I have turned away individuals because I cannot work for them. My spirits have indicated no, or I have a feeling that there's no way that I can help them. So there is that ethical part as well. Some people don't charge money, some people do. I'm not going to get into the financial ethics of shamanism or healing. I simply will not engage in that conversation. it is up to the individual what they choose to do or don't choose to do with respect to how they receive support for their work. Money and ethics are a huge topic. It's a quagmire. It is argued about all the time in the shamanic community, the witch community, the other healer communities. And I simply have come to my own terms. My own spirits have worked with me with respect to charging for my services. And I have received flack within my community for accepting monetary support for the work that I do. And I've also received support for accepting monetary exchange for the work that I do. So it's a divided issue, one that I will not get into, and is entirely up to you, or entirely up to you and the group that you're with on that. So to get back to that, I want to say that, not to that, but to get back to where we are. So much of our activity involves the lives of others, and sometimes I hold the scope of practice in mind, which matters can often be intimate and sensitive. When I work with people, the matters that they come to me are very often intimate and sensitive, and everything around this needs to be treated as such. I use extreme care and delicacy and awareness in my healing and in my divination practices. I'm not always delicate when I have a client in my room. I'm not always delicate when I am speaking to people. I don't mean delicate as in I need to treat you with kid gloves, but delicacy if I'm discussing an aspect of healing work. In my podcast, I have brought up various healings that I have taken part in, various journeys that I've taken part in, and I'll share one in this journey or in this podcast today. But I have to do this with care and with delicacy and with awareness. I have to be an ethically responsible practitioner. Given the availability of the medical, psychiatric, psychological, or any other helping professions, if I feel that someone that I'm working with requires those professions, then it behooves me to mention it to them or to talk to them, because there are often times when we are working together with the soul or with the psyche, and it can help to have another voice to help with the integration process, or to help with how to analyze what has occurred. How do you work with the energy that has occurred if you have, etc., etc. I'm going to go off on a tangent, so I'm going to stop myself and get back to where I was talking about. I knew that I would go off on tangents on this because even though I have a structure of what I want to say today, it can be a hot topic for some people. But for me, it's not really a hot topic. It's just a pretty straightforward topic. The necessity of request. I really want to talk about this. It is likely that you will be aware of situations where your expertise might be helpful, long before this is recognized by someone who needs help. I'm sure all of us have run into that. I'm sure sometimes people even looking at me go, oh, that person could really use some help. But, their ethics are strongly intact and they don't come up to me and go, well, hey, let me give you some, insert the blank, right? Nevertheless, specific shamanic work for another can be performed. In my world, it can only be performed when it is requested. Even when your seasoned intuition clearly suggests to you that someone could benefit from a specific healing, I strongly encourage you to withhold from suggesting this directly. I had a journey many years ago which fundamentally changed my relationship to the spirit world and the necessity of request. I was so green at this point in time that I did not know enough even to keep myself safe, per se. And as a result of which, I went on a very harrowing journey. During the journey, I encountered a soul piece of a dear old friend. And this soul piece had been stolen using a type of sorcery. This was also my very first run-in with sorcery. I didn't even know what sorcery was. My teacher had never talked about it. My teacher had really not gone into the ethics of it. I have a very strong guide or healing spirit who has taught me much about ethics in shamanism. So although I've read quite a bit, I've discussed quite a bit, I've thought about it quite a bit, I also have had long discussions with my healing spirits with respect to how do I work with this. So I had long discussions with respect to the sorcery. And at that time, I was very poorly equipped to deal with it. I was actually very poorly equipped to deal with this journey that I was on. Ultimately, I retrieved the soul piece and I securely placed it inside my rocks. I use rocks in my mouth when I do soul retrieval work. You may or may not have this in your practice, or you may or may not use this as a soul retrieval. You may or may not do soul retrieval work. I don't know. I don't know, constant listener, where you are. I did not have permission from my friend to perform any healing work on their behalf. This was just on the cusp of the revolution of home computers and access to the World Wide Web. I did not have the World Wide Web at my house, and I knew my friend did not either. So what did I do in those old days? I wrote a letter. I consulted my spirits. Without their permission, I was not even allowed to send the soul piece back long distance because there were very specific instructions and information regarding the sorcery, and my friend had to be aware of it. My friend never responded, ever again. The letter was short. It simply said, I had a dream and I needed to discuss it. That's what I talk to, and I talk to people who don't speak the shamanic language. I don't say I had a shamanic journey. I say, I had a dream. Many of us can accept a dream. Many of us can accept the discussion of a dream. We know the language of dreams. It's not an alerted word. It is a word that fits within our script of reality. Shamanic journey may not fit within the script of everyone's reality. I was very perplexed for some time as to what to do with the soul piece in the rock on one of my altars in my house. And because my friend never responded to me, I wrote out the journey, because many times after journeys, you forget all of the details, or you forget many of the details. They're like small gifts. If you don't write them down, very often aspects, pieces, or the entire journey in and of itself will disappear from your memory. I wrote it all down in case this person would ever come and say, I really do need to learn this. I also wrote it down because it was a very tough lesson for me. The entire journey was a tough lesson for me. It was a lesson for me to learn that I actually had a voice. Spirit said you had to go do this. I had the ability to say no. I didn't know that. It didn't occur to me to say no. I believe that it is sorcery to perform healing without a request. In my world, it is. In your world, it may not be. This is truly between you and what you deal with. When I first began my shamanic journey, I felt like John the Baptist, the crier in the wilderness. And if you're not familiar with the Christian myth, the myth was there was a gentleman called John the Baptist. And John the Baptist was the person, like the town crier, went out and talked to, and bespoke the benefit of this prophet called Jesus who was coming, etc., etc., etc. But John the Baptist was referred to as the crier in the wilderness because, I think this comes from, if you look back into my podcast, I talked about the difference between nature and wilderness, between nature and wild. So the crier in the wilderness, the outer edges, kind of like shamanism. We're in the outer edges. But my friends but my sacred friends, my power animals, my spirit kin, my teachers, and the aspect of shamanism in and of itself was not always well received. I was so fervent in the very beginning, sharing my love for the drum with others. Now I have laid down my jar of wild honey and left the wilderness, and I chose to speak now when my voice has been invited and my words are anticipated. It is a change between what I know best to ask me, and I will gladly share my knowledge. Ego is a very funny thing, I think. So in light of my confession, I go on. I have met many well-meaning individuals, all too eager to share their ability to heal or counsel without ever being asked first. I was one of those people, so I do not stand in the place of judgment. I do stand in the place of cringe, but my cringe only comes because this has been my teachings. This is my understanding. But what do you do? What if you've encountered something in a journey about somebody else? You're a caring person. What do you do if you've encountered a person in your journeys who could use some help? What if you've been shown that their power animal has disappeared and has a desire to return to them? This is a suggestion. Perhaps an option is to talk about shamanic services in general terms and inform them of what you offer, but not the specifics of what you know about them. So keep that in mind. They're different things. So you talk about your shamanic services in general terms. What do you offer? But you don't tell them, hey, I was doing this journey and I discovered this jaguar. Jaguar wasn't mine, jaguar was yours, and said, yo, take me on back to that human being. And I said, oh, I cannot do that because I am not asked. And jaguar, well, may want to kick my ass, but what ifs? Can't make me do what I cannot do. So, for instance, what you might say to the person that you encounter their spirit kin lost or their power animal lost, you could say something to the effect of, I offer shamanic services. We work very closely with our power and our spirit kin, and I have found a deeper relationship to my own power since this began. Can you relate to feeling as though some of your power is missing? So here I am. I'm a human being. I do offer shamanic work. I work really closely with my spirit kin. And in working with them, I've gained more power than I had before, and I've gained a deeper relationship and understanding of my own power and my own self. Do you ever feel as though some of your power is missing? Sometimes something like that hits the mark. So that person that you're speaking to may reflect on it for a minute and respond with an acknowledgement and say, well, yeah, actually this is something that's been gnawing at me for some time. And at this point, you might say, well, what I generally say at this point is, if you're ever interested in learning more, let me know. And I leave it at that. However, others can certainly make it clear that work in this area is something that they do. So you can say, oh, well, this is some work that I do. And you can offer to do a divination, which is like a shamanic diagnosis, perhaps to be followed by a power animal retrieval. Still, keep in mind, you are not in a position to inform them of what you already know. If they agree to the healing session, it is then when you get together that you do your work and inform them of that which is appropriate. And even then, there are some things I see which may be upsetting or harmful physically to the client. I had the privilege of working with Sandra Ingerman, and this is how she explained it to me. When we were talking about soul retrieval work, some people have really beautiful journeys, and They don't ever encounter or rarely encounter fights or, nefarious individuals holding soul pieces, so on and so forth. And I did, especially in the very beginning of my healing work and the very beginning of my shamanic, doing soul retrieval work, doing power retrievals, those sorts of things. I often encountered quite a bit of battle. I encountered quite a bit of war. And I often wanted to share, but I didn't. So what she said was this: you have a war story and you battled for the soul. And there are some cultures who embrace the war and the strength it took to get their spirit back. However, this is in my words, not in Sandra Ingerman's, in my Canadian society, sorry, right? We tend to worry more about the other person, me, getting hurt. And what Sandra explained is that if a person is afraid that you were going to get hurt getting their soul piece back, it takes away or diminishes the power of the healing. I don't want my healing work to be a source of guilt for another person. I don't. One of the tacit truths I tried to hold on to is the best advice given is that which is asked for. How then do we make our insight, training, and experience available and participate in healing that so need to be done? The answer is in how we offer ourselves. I am fortunate to have lived and practiced in the same community for many years. Word of mouth is a powerful tool. For others, it works to simply make their presence known, and generally speaking, educate and then describe the kinds of services. This was never done or never an issue in tribal or indigenous societies, as nearly everyone knew the strengths and weaknesses of nearly everyone else. In the contemporary world, where such community relationships have been displaced, making ourselves known for our skills takes additional steps in education, advertising, and spreading the word of our availability. This is the contemporary substitute for the natural awareness of an indigenous society, where a potential client or their friends and families would already know who to seek out for whatever specific skill was needed. When I do my reading, when I have read various books or anthropological texts, it does talk about, and we've all read about, people who know this particular shaman is good for this particular healing, and so somebody and their family will travel X number of kilometers to go to this particular skilled healer for work because they're known for this specific work. There are some cultures, there's a particular native tribe that is known as the bone setters, and people would come for kilometers to see this particular medicine man in their particular tribe to have their bones set. I wish I could remember specifically what it was, and I don't remember which tribe it was, but I remember being really quite surprised by that. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. It is up to the client to determine if a shamanic healing is something they want to pursue. Then it's also up to the client to accept and utilize your healing efforts. And I've talked about this before in the other podcasts that I've done. We can get all the healing work we like, but then what do we do with it? If we don't actually use it, if we don't actually integrate it, then it may not necessarily do you a lot of good. This is sometimes hard to do, but no matter how much suffering you see, you cannot presume to direct the course of a client's life, even if you know that their current course will lead to further suffering. This holds if you have never worked with them, during your work with them, or even after you have worked with the client. The client has the right to make their own decisions, even when you see that certain path they take might result in harm to them. There are always special cases and situations, and that may lead to a future chat on ethics. But I want to just repeat for a second that it is up to the individual that you're speaking to determine if what you're offering is up to them, is something they want to pursue. It is up to the person you work with to accept and to use your healing efforts. One of the challenging lessons I had to learn very early on in this work, and it does relate to ethics, is I have no control over the outcome. I used to, this was when my ego was obviously firmly entrenched in my healing work. I used to be offended and angry with my clients if they did not do the work that I told them to do, if they did not continue with the journey, if they did not do the ceremony they were supposed to do, if they did not, etc., etc., etc. So it was a challenge for me to accept that I am not responsible for their healing. They're responsible for their healing. I'm not responsible for the outcome of the healing. I am very responsible for how I do the healing work. I am very responsible for how I treat you, how I speak to you, how I empower you, how I give back your power. That is very important, and that is something that is within my grasp to do. It is also very unsettling to get back to the part of knowing something about somebody in a journey. It is very important to recognize that we all come from different places, and to recognize that we all come to us with different matters in hand. It is a challenge sometimes to have knowledge and information and not be able to share it. It is a challenge as a healer to see something that needs to be healed, and yet you cannot. But then I have to question again, is seeing something that quote-unquote needs to be healed, is that from the eye of ego because that person does not reflect the perfection you perceive them to reflect? Or is it truly with the shamanic eye or a healer's eye that you see them? That's also something we need to take into consideration. We need to take into consideration whether or not this is coming from a place of ego and wanting to help someone, or if this is coming from a place of truth for you. I hope that this gives you some ideas. These are my thoughts, my ideas on what I think we need to do in order to remain true within and of ourselves. I think it's really important that we remember that we are really held by our ethics because we really work within the confines of vulnerability. People trust spirits. People trust people who are ambassadors of spirit. You can't abuse that trust. I don't want you to abuse that trust, because we are wounded enough. When we find a healer, it is so important that we trust the process of healing within our deeply wounded self. It is important to trust that we can heal, even if we are deeply wounded ourselves. It is only within my own healing that I can recognize and work with your healing. It is only if I treat you with the utmost respect and ethically correct that I think I can stand in best service. If I'm unethical, I cannot stand in best service. Anyhow, these are just a fox's thoughts. And this is a very short chat about something I have pondered much, and I'm certain I'm not the only one who has pondered it. I bid you a fond farewell until the next time that we run across each other on the lovely airways. I wish you a most blessed time. May Spirit work well with you. Bye.
Thank you again for joining us here on the Shaman's Way podcast. If you have any questions, would like to make a request for a future episode, or if you're looking for other shamanic resources, including free drumming tracks, please visit us at shamansway.net. Until the next episode, be well, everyone.